morning of Vintage Faith, and we are up to a subject that raises a few eyebrows in the culture that we live in. It is a challenging one to address in the temperature of the age in which we live. It is a hot potato subject. It will get you kicked out of just about any public forum that you go into. It will have you publicly chastised. It will, if you bring this subject up, you will often become the laughingstock, a ridicule. You will be put in your place very quickly. And it has become more and more in the age that we live in a challenge to discuss the very simple and pristine topic that Jesus is the only way. This seems a rather fundamental, and all of what we've been looking at through this series have been fundamentals. So they're fundamental concept, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know historically when the shift came for us, but around September 11th, 2001, there was a great shift in thinking in the general populace. This had always been in the fore, kind of brewing in the background, and somehow now anybody who takes religion really seriously, who looks with some sort of, I don't know what you want to say, bombastic vision, if you want to put it that way, pushing one idea down everybody's throat, to get crass about it. Well, those people, they need to be put in their place. They're dangerous. I don't know if you've recognized the atmosphere in which you are living, if you have tried to be public with your faith or witness to anybody of late. Somewhere along the way, you have had a little bit of pushback in regard to this subject. If you haven't, can I just say politely, you haven't been witnessing enough. Because it is only a matter of time until you find that somebody is telling you are not being tolerant. When I was a youngster, I remember the word tolerant was taught to us as a virtue. It was something that you were to be with those people you disagreed with. You would tolerate a point of view that you didn't see eye to eye with. You would treat that person with respect, with dignity. That was what tolerance was. Tolerance was getting along with people even though you disagreed with them on fundamental levels. The word today has been completely reworked. It has taken on a whole new meaning. Now the word tolerance carries this baggage idea that every view is equal and you are to tolerate them all equally. And you are to accept every view as equally true. Of course, this is the way it is in the eyes of the law. The law in the country that we live in, as you know, and we're thankful for it, has allowed all views to be equal in the eyes of the law. But what we are allowed legally does not mean theologically is also true. We are legally given the right to believe whatever we want. But that doesn't mean that just because you believe whatever you want, it's actually true. But it has come to be such a way that we are often labeled bigots and narrow-minded. To challenge the day we live in, to stand up and say Jesus is the only way. And I don't know if you've ever been labeled a bigot or being narrow-minded. I just want to put a few thoughts out there as we kind of chat about this notion of being a bigot, of being narrow-minded, of being so bombastic in our view, so clearly just so intolerant. Can I just remind us all, whether you disagree or agree with the notion that Jesus is the only way, that all truth is always narrow. That by definition, whenever you're making a truth statement, you are making a declaration that by its very definition rules out other things. And by saying even that all ideas and views are equal, that is a truth statement that you might want to make. And you are by virtue ruling out anybody who wants to make a truth statement otherwise. Truth is always, by definition, narrow. If you are sitting where you are sitting, and that is true, and truth is nothing more than a declaration of reality, and if that is exactly the reality that you are sitting in this building at this moment, then think of all the things we have just ruled out. You are not on Mars, you are not sitting on the Eiffel Tower, you're not at the beach, you're not lying in bed where you wish you were, you are doing none of those other things. The reality is, you are here. Everything else is ruled out. How narrow-minded of you to say that you're sitting in this building right now today. Truth is always narrow. When people call you narrow-minded, it really isn't really an issue. I don't know why we should take offense to that. They're being narrow-minded in their view. Everybody is narrow-minded when it comes to making truth claims. That is a given. This is smoke. This is nothing more than rhetoric that does nothing but attempt to change the subject. And so it immediately comes up when you make a truth claim, Jesus is the only way. You're being narrow-minded. I like to say, and what's your point? Because I know that. And you are being narrow-minded by telling me that I'm being narrow-minded. What's your point? That has nothing to do with his truth claim. And what immediately begins to happen in the culture that we live in, if you've ever done this publicly, we have now been socialized that it's okay to now call this person on the carpet who has said something so audacious that Jesus is the only way. How dare you in a public make such a claim as that in the country that we live in where everybody's equal. You are a bigot. You are narrow-minded. You are intolerant. Can I just say something? So what? If you want to call me those names, that does nothing at all to the real point. Calling a person names, which is exactly the response that our culture does for us, oftentimes. I don't want to get you paranoid, but that's usually the case. And if you're listening to CBC at all with half an ear, you know that's exactly what happens. Attacking the person does absolutely no value to discrediting the claim that Jesus has made that he is the only way. That's the point we should be arguing. Is it true that Jesus said he's the only way? I believe that's true. Well, you're a bigot. Well, that's irrelevant. I mean, you can call me that, but that's really not the point. It's like you going to the doctor and the doctor telling you you need surgery or you will die. And you saying to the doctor, you're cruel. That's fine. His personality, that has nothing to do with his truth claim that he's made on you. Whether or not you like him is irrelevant. We're living in a culture where somehow they think, the mindset of the populace, is that if you just heap insults upon the person, you have somehow now skirted and avoided the argument and disproved the very truth claim that's being made. It's nonsense. It's smoke. Please don't be put off by that. And please recognize the culture that we live in, that as believers, historically, we have made this claim. Jesus is the only way. In the culture that we live in, there will always be pushback. You will always be called narrow, all the more. What do we do with that? Do we run? Do we hide? Jesus is the only way. See, it's not my problem. I didn't make that claim up. Jesus is the one who made that claim. So really, in a sense, keep in mind, you don't take this personally when people get upset. It's not about you. If you were claiming for yourself that you believed of yourself because it's passed through your grid and you've come to agree it and you believe Jesus is the only way, you'd be a bigot. You would be arrogant. But you're not making the claim on your own credentials. You are claiming what Jesus claimed. The onus is now on him, not on you. So it's irrelevant what people think. It's irrelevant what people say. The truth of the matter is, Jesus made a very strong claim. And we hold to that claim. It's not my fault that he made the claim. In fact, in the age that we live in, it is outrightly rejected without any analyzation of whether this truth claim could actually be true. Let's look at a little bit of context before we read the text. John chapter 14, verse 3, and if I go and prepare a place for you, this is Jesus speaking, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am you may be also, and you know the way to where I am going. These very famous words. And they're listening, the disciples are listening to this, and they're probably wondering to themselves, what, I thought we just were here. We're at the Last Supper, and what are you talking about? We're leaving. Where are we going? To the store? We got our food. What, are we going to another city? They couldn't work out. Where are we traveling to? What do you mean you're going? There was probably silence in the room. Everyone was wondering, what is he talking about? Finally, Thomas, kind of pin drop silence, kind of breaks the silence. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father. Now we know where he's going. Now he's explained it. He's going to the Father. And I'm going to come back and take you to myself, to be with me. That's where he's going. How do you get to the Father? I am the way. What kind of a claim is this? Nobody in history has made claims like Jesus made. Nobody in any religious history has ever made declarations like this. This is a very narrow gate, to use Jesus' other metaphor and analogy. Let's just take a minute to look at these words. I know this is slightly technical, but it's also mildly interesting, so I'm going to cause you to endure a little bit of original language. The Greek you are looking at underneath, Jesus said, John 14:6, is simply ego eimi hodos. Let's look at this backwards, because it's a little intriguing, just so you understand what's really been said here. Hodos is simply the word, it's exactly literally translated, it's not difficult at all. You're practically a Greek scholar at this point. The word hodos simply means way. More technically means a road. For example, if we were living in Athens, there would be a sign out here on this street, and it would say, Hodos Taylor. That's exactly what it would say. This would be Hodos Maple. We would be looking at the way, the road, the path, that's the word. The word ha, simply the article the. Let's go back to the beginning. So we have the way at the end, back to the beginning. Ego is how you pronounce it in Greek. Does that look familiar to you? That's exactly where we get our word ego, and it simply means I. That's all it is, I. But here's the interesting part. The word eimi also means I. Jesus actually repeats the word I. He says I, literally says, I am, or I exist. I am the existing one who is the way, to put it very awkwardly and woodenly. He actually repeats the word I. And he says this for emphasis, for the point of underlining the truth as well as anything else. I, as if he's also throwing in your mind and your understanding the word only. I exist as the way. It's me. I am the way. And this very phrase, I am, interestingly enough, is not unfamiliar to us. Exodus 3, verses 13 and 14, if I take you back to Moses in the burning bush, Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. Now that little phrase, I am who I am, was said in Hebrew, written in Hebrew, but in Jesus' day, what they had was what we have now, a translation. I don't read Hebrew, you don't read Hebrew. So what we've done, obviously, is take a Hebrew text and translate it into our language. It's called English. So you have an English Bible from a translation. In the day that Jesus lived in, not everybody understood Hebrew. They had a translation into their language that was Greek. The Hebrew translation into the Greek language, you don't need to know this, is called the Septuagint. Okay, they would have read the Septuagint and known this book. And the translation in their translation, if I'm not confusing you, try to stay with me, of the phrase, I am who I am, guess what it is? It is ego eimi. It is exactly the exact phrase that Jesus used in John 14:6. Jesus references back from their Bible, back to the very beginning, to the book of Exodus, to the moment that Moses meets Jehovah. And he asks him, what is your name? And God says, I am, I just exist. I am the self-existing one. I am the am that it is. I just am. I am that I am. And now Jesus comes along and says, how do we know the way? And he answers and he says, I am that I am the way. And he makes a declaration subtly that he's actually the God of the Old Testament. And he's subtly inferring to them that he, in fact, is the same very God. This declaration is unprecedented. Nobody in the history of religious thought has ever, as far as recorded history knows, and I'm not just blowing smoke here. You go look this up, check your universities, go around the world. I'm just saying, there is nobody else who has ever made a claim like this. He made a truth claim to be singularly the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the way to that God, because he is that God. Nobody's done that before. This man is unlike any other. And the question is not, that's so narrow-minded. That's not the question. The question is that a valid statement? Is that true? Because that is the question we need to answer. It doesn't matter your opinion of me. It doesn't matter your opinion of Jesus. It doesn't matter if you think he's bigoted and narrow-minded and not tolerant. That's irrelevant. Is that true? That's what's on the line. And that is the question that we need to continually bring our culture in line with. And constantly remember that we're holding their feet to that simple question. In love, in kindness, in generosity. But we want them to know and see. I didn't make this up. Don't be mad at me. And we often get railed against. People like to say, aren't all religions basically the same? This only comes off the lips of someone who's never studied religion, who has no clue what they're talking about, with all due respect. They'll say, we're all climbing the same mountain, we all start on different sides, we all have different paths, but at the end of the day, we all get to the same top. Well, could you tell me what authority on which you can base that kind of a statement? Because if you know anything about religion at all, that is not even remotely true. All religions are not basically the same. This is exactly fundamentally the issue that we're dealing with. And when we talk about needing to be tolerant, it is not possible for any religion to be tolerant. Because at the end of the day, we are fundamentally, diametrically opposed to each other. Not in hatred, but in facts. For example, polytheists believe in many impersonal gods. Okay, does that sound like something that a Jew would believe? Does that sound like the opposite of what a Jew believes? Picture, if you will, the ancient Greeks that had all these gods, or the ancient Egyptians who had the sun god and the Nile god, and all the plagues of Egypt were all representative or attacks, if you will, on their gods. They had a multiplicity of impersonal gods that you couldn't know. Now, either that is true, or the Jewish people are right who say there is one God and he is a personal God, or these people are true who say there are many gods and you can't know these gods. One of them is right and one of them is wrong because they're diametrically opposed to each other, or they're both wrong. But they cannot both at the same time be right. All religions are not the same. Islam, for example, denies the Trinity and denies that Jesus is the Son of God. Well, who's right? Christians very clearly and plainly say that Jesus is the very Son of God. That there is only one God, and he's displayed himself as a triune God, as challenging as that is for our minds to get around. Who's right? Fundamentally, at the basis of what we believe, at the very fundamental foundation, we are diametrically opposed. And can I remind you, it is illogical that two things that oppose each other can be true at exactly the same time. It cannot be so. Somebody's right and somebody's wrong. If you had a bowl of M&Ms and you made the truth statement, there is only one M&M in that bowl. You cannot look in that bowl and see it filled with M&Ms and have made a truth statement. It can't be only one M&M and full of many M&Ms at the same time. It is impossible. Two contradictory ideas cannot both be true at the same time. There is either one God, or there are many gods, or there is no God. One of these is correct. They are not all true. We can never all be true. It is not true that all religions are just basically the same. That's why Jesus, who was a Jew, who believed very plainly in one God, in Luke chapter 4, when he is tempted by the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time and said to him, "To you I will give all authority and glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to him whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus said to him, "Well, all truth claims are the same claims. All religions are pretty much equal. Everyone's kind of climbing up the same mountain and getting to different peaks. What's a little Satanism? Sure, I'll go for that." No, he doesn't. He declares that there is only one God. You shall worship the Lord your God, and you shall only serve that one God. Jesus declared in himself what he believed. Doesn't matter what you worship as long as you worship it, is what the devil thought. Well, that is not the case. It does matter what you worship, because you may not be worshiping what is true. And this is the fundamental idea of the Old Testament. This is the God of the Old Testament. God was never allowed other religions to be tolerated. Now, whether that makes him a bigot or not is your decision, but this is God. God has always been, there is only one God, it's me. Only worship me. You can have no other gods. All other religions must go. There is no other way to me. You must come to me. I am the only God. This is all the way through the Bible. What are you supposed to do with this now when you come to Jesus, who virtually says exactly the same thing that the Old Testament has always taught? This is the theme of Judaism. John 14, verse 8, Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father. It's enough for us. Well, let me just explain what he's really saying there. He's saying, you know, Jesus, we saw you walk in water. That was really cool. That was awesome. We saw you feed some people with just a little bit of food. Amazing. That, I don't know how you did. That was jaw-dropping. We were at that wedding that didn't have wine, and wow. That was something else. We were at the funeral, and you raised that guy from the dead. High five. That was amazing. But can I just say, you know, there's one little thing that really would tip the scales for us. There's one little thing we need. If you could just show us God, if you could just let us see God, that would be perfect. Then we would really know exactly what we need to know. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long that you still do not know me, Philip? Didn't you see the things I did and you haven't figured out who I am? Listen to this statement. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Philip's mind. What? You mean I'm already looking at God? By looking at Jesus, I'm looking at God. Jesus is making the claim to be the God of the Old Testament. And what is the God of the Old Testament always said? Not all religions are the same. Not all religions are true. Not everybody can go up the same mountain, a different path and come to the same top. That is not the way it works. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? Some Trinity words that are very confusing for our minds. The words that I say, I do not speak to you on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his work. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or else believe on the count of the works, these miracles that you've seen, these works themselves. I and the Father are one, is what he's saying in essence. I am that God of the Old Testament. And the declaration of the God of the Old Testament has always been, you are only to serve one God. And you cannot have different ideas that all claim to be true, and they are all true. Let me just ask this simple question that sometimes we get railed against with such our narrow, bigoted, intolerant view to say that Jesus is the only way. What about those innocent people who've never heard about Jesus? What about them? It's obvious from the question what the answer would be. What about those innocent people who've never heard? That's not fair. How can Jesus be the only way when there's millions of people in the world who have their religion, who have no idea about Jesus? That's not fair. I thought God was a God of love. You can't allow that to happen. Can I just say politely? That if this statement was exactly as it is, what about the innocent people who've never heard of their need for Jesus? The answer would be, the innocent people who've never heard, they die and go to heaven. The way that question is worded, it's exactly the answer. But in a sense, this is a trick question. Because in truth, there are no innocent people. In truth, there's no such thing as an innocent person. So the question itself becomes invalid very quickly. In truth, if you were completely innocent and you had no sin, you would go to heaven. The truth of the matter is, as we know from Romans 1, the truth about God has been plain to them because God has made it plain to them. His invisible qualities, his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in things that have been made so that they are without excuse. That's the bottom line. What about the innocent people who've never heard? If they're really innocent, and there aren't any, they get to go to heaven. The truth of the matter is, every heart has a conscience that knows that they're guilty before God. Every heart has creation around them that has shown them that the God that they know and the God they worship is not adequate for the answers of what they see. That there's something bigger, there's something more. And everybody has been given enough revelation that they're found guilty before God. Let me just try to wrap this up. You've been very patient this morning. Why should I believe? Why should I stand against the culture, the tide that tells me that I'm a bigot, that I am narrow-minded, that I am not being tolerant? Why should I believe that Jesus is the only way? I've told you already, this is not a claim that I made. This is a claim that Jesus made. Can I just remind you of his credentials? The eyewitness accounts declare that Jesus performed many miracles. This is something you can explain as you're witnessing to people. Just remind you this morning of just why is his claim credible. Jesus did things that nobody else could do. These are New Testament accounts that are historically accurate, even on a secular level. This is a New Testament first century eyewitness account of exactly what Jesus did. And he did these miracles even in the front of people who were skeptics, people who disregarded him, people who hated him, people who we wanted to kill. This wasn't little tricks that he fooled a few friends. This was in front of mass people, and people were completely in awe, and they knew that this could only come from God. Jesus declared himself to have being able to make a statement like that by the virtue of the fact that he declared himself to be God in his miracles. He also did the miraculous, the unbelievable, and you could study this out for yourself, but there are prophecies that absolutely could never be fulfilled unless you were in fact the very Son of God. There are so many things that God said would happen that came to pass in Jesus' life exactly as he said that as were predicted that they would, to the day sometimes. I mean, it is astronomically, mathematically impossible for anybody to have actually fulfilled all of these prophecies accidentally. This could only itself come from God. It authenticates the very person of Christ. This person came from God. This person acts like God. This person claims to be God. And more than that, this person who says that he can actually give you eternal life actually himself rose from the dead and came back to life on the third day. Now those are Jesus' credentials. He makes a statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we now, as in our faith, make the claim that Jesus is the only way. Why do we make that claim? Because I'm going with his credentials. I'm leaning on the fact that this man has done everything necessary to make that a credibly believable statement. I'm not parking my brains at the door. I am not being a bigot. I am not being narrow-minded, because truth by definition is narrow, and if I go with him, I'm ruling everything else out. If you want to call me intolerant, I am intolerant of tolerance. That's what I'm intolerant of. Because there's no reason that you cannot make this claim in the age that we live in. It is nothing more than the very same truth claim that anybody else is making. The disciples also believed this truth claim, and they went and preached the message. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Jesus is the only way. And this is simply our vintage faith.